Welcome. Welcome everybody to our latest discussion in our Parliaments in Dialogue series between the European Parliament and the UK Houses of Parliament. My name is Susanne Oberhauser and I'm the head of the Parliament office in London. Today we are asking our panelists, Baroness Young of Hornsey and Mrs. Samira Rafaela, member of the European Parliament, and our moderator, Roger Robinson, what it means to be Black and European. 2020 has seen support for the Black Lives Matter movement go beyond the US borders. In the UK, we have had intense debates on the past role of Britain in the slave trade, the country's colonial past, and its attempts to reconcile these in the spheres such as the arts, commerce, and politics. These debates are also ongoing in former European colonial powers and will doubtlessly continue. So, our distinguished panelists today are Baroness Young of Hornsey, who after a career in acting in theatre and television, became an arts administrator and moving on to become a professor of cultural studies at Middlesex University. She's a former project director at the Black Cultural Archives and was head of culture at the Greater London Authority. She currently advises arts, cultural agencies and organizations on policy, diversity, leadership and strategic planning. Baroness Young sat on the boards of several national cultural organizations, including the South Bank Centre, the Royal National Theatre, the Royal Commission on Historical Manuscripts, and the National Archives. She's a member of the House of Lords since 2004, where she sits as an independent crossbench peer. She has been involved in campaigns criminalizing and combating forms of modern enslavement, and more generally on human rights and equality issues. As an ambassador for the Ethical Fashion Forum, she uses her political position to promote ethical, sustainable fashion. Our second panelist is Samira Rafaela, a Dutch MEP since 2019. She sits on the Committee on International Trade and Women's Rights and Gender Equality. And she's also the co-chair of the European Parliament Anti-Racism and Diversity Intergroup. Samira brings a unique mix of background and life experience. To be united in diversity, as the EU's official motto goes. Born the daughter of Jewish Khorasan Dutch mother and a Ghanaian Nigerian Muslim father, she studied public administration at the University of Leiden, where she specialized on the origins of radicalization and terrorism. She has worked as an advisor to the municipal government of Amsterdam and the Dutch National Police. And she has been nominated for Harper's Bazaar's Women of the Year 2020 awards. The discussions this afternoon will be moderated by Roger Robinson, a writer and performer who lives between London and Trinidad. He was chosen as one of the 50 writers who have influenced the Black British writing canon. He has received commissions from, amongst other, the National Trust, the BBC, the National Portrait Gallery, the V&A, and many more. He was awarded numerous poetry prizes, the latest being the 2019 Royal Society for Literature's Ondaatje Prize for A Portable Paradise. His poem, And If I Speak of Paradise, is currently to be found as part of Poems on the Underground on hundreds of tube trains all over London. So we have a very interesting panel this afternoon. Thank you all for tuning in, and thank you very much our panelists and our moderator. And without further ado, I'll hand over to Roger. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that introduction. So I want to first really thank Samira and Lola for taking time to take part in this conversation. It's a complete honor for me, and I look forward to the conversation. What I want to start up with first is a sort of understanding where we're at now. In the 80s, Carol Philip, in his book, The European Tribe, wrote, Black people have always been present in a Europe that has chosen either not to see us or to judge us as an insignificant minority or as a temporary but dismissible mistake. So what, if anything, has changed for Black Europeans since the 80s? And what might be this present moment that we're witnessing for Black Europeans in the light of Brexit, George Floyd, so many things have Black Lives Matter, COVID, and Donald Trump. And so the question has really two sections, you know, it's just like, what's changed? Lola?
You start with the easy questions, don't
sorry.
you?
So, you know, okay.
So,
So,
when you, I'm sure Samira will agree, when you gave that long list of what the context is, you know, killing of George Floyd and Brexit, new president, you know, all of these huge things, of course, we experience these global influences as much as anyone else. I think one of the things that's changed for me, and I particularly draw attention to this in the context of having just participated in several events celebrating Black History Month in the UK, which I hope we'll come back to. One of the things that struck me is that there's no real excuse for ignorance anymore about the historical aspects of our presence in Europe, in Britain and in Europe as a whole. And so I think that the kind of scholarly work and also perhaps the more popular work that's come out that absolutely highlights the presence of people of African descent in and of Europe for, you know, for millennia. So we can get that one off the table, as it were, to kind of question that idea of presence, because, you know, with that idea of not having been present comes the idea that you don't belong, and there's a rationale for you not belonging because you've only just come here and you've come here to kind of milk us of all our resources and so on. That position was never really tenable, and it's even less so now in the context of historical research. So I'll throw that at you as a starter.
That's good. It's good. Good answer. Good answer. The reason I asked that question is because I wanted to get out all the other strands may come from this. So this is the big thing, and there are lots of small things that will come from it, even from what you said. You know, Samira, what do you think? I'll be interested in your viewpoint.
Yes, thank you very much. You know, I think we come a long way, but I must admit that I'm probably part of the generation of politicians, but also of a new generation in general that thinks that things are going too slow. Sometimes I'm raising the question for myself, like, didn't we learn from history enough? I do think that we still are trying to tackle barriers that generations that were before us were trying to tackle too. And I sometimes wonder what they would think if they would see us still struggling today. If I take, for example, the motto that we have in the EU, United in Diversity, I think that's a very good one, but I do think that things are not that significant yet. If you take into account that we have in the EU, so the EU citizens in total, like 45 million, and then take into account we have 705 members of European Parliament, and then only 24 are non-white members of European Parliament. I do think that's not significant enough, and I wonder sometimes how it is possible that we still didn't go that quick. If we look, for example, at the representation of politicians in our institutions. So yes, we should learn from history, but I do think we need to do much more when it comes to education, when it comes to awareness, also in our own institutions. And I do think there's still a very significant role that political parties in our institutions need to play to really break through these barriers. Because I just, mentioned an example of how not significant representation still is.
Interesting. Okay, I want to pick up on that point that Lola was making, and also your point too, Samira. I want to pick up on the point of that invisibility and that education. An interesting thing was happening. I have a 6.5-year-old son. And so my 6.5-year-old son came back during Black History Month and asked me if I knew about Rosa Parks. And I was like, oh, I know about Rosa Parks, but you do know she's American. He's like, really? And then he asked me if I knew about Martin Luther King. I was like, okay, so clearly in his school, Black History Month means American Black History Month, you know? So they're not talking anything about slavery, colonialism. There's none of that history being taught to my 6.5-year-old son currently, which I found very interesting. And I said, this is all African-American history. And then he said, why do you call them African-Americans? And I was like, oh my God, now I'm going to have to explain slavery to the 6.5-year-old boy. And it had to go to a point where I had to tell him, granddad, me, mommy, every Black person who you know here has been taken from another land at a point in time. He's 6.5, so I had to kind of boil it down for him. Taken from another land, and I could see him blinking, and he was like, everyone? All the Black people? And then he paused for a while. I was like, oh, this could turn very bad. And then he said, how rude. I was like, whoa, okay. And I realized he got it. He got it because it was simple. But it seems like they invested in not educating particularly Black populations in the history, or especially the uncomfortable, unpalatable history. So like, look, Lola, I was trying to pick up on what you said in terms of, okay, well, what is this erasure, and why, what and why?
Well, first of all, though, I just want to come back on something that,
Sure.
that Samira said, because I'm not quite sure whether I made myself clear in my initial remarks. I wasn't saying that we should, as it were, substitute history for activism or for, for doing things and changing things. And also, I would say that it's not, I always want to push back on people when they say nothing has changed, because that's not true. Things have changed. They may not necessarily have progressed in the linear fashion that we would like them to progress, but things do change over time. So it's how we can work with those changes or against those changes or institute the kinds of changes that we want to see. And for me, history is not some abstract theoretical thing. It's what's happening now and will be recorded. And that takes me into the point that you've just made, Roger, which is about this thing of how, well, it's partly to do with how you talk about really difficult subjects with young people. I'm actually convinced that children are much more open to these kinds of discussions than we might give them credit for. But also, so what is the purpose of Black History Month, and why do we sort of fixate on African Americans? I think there's lots of ways of thinking that through. And sort of articulating the notion of that problem. And it does become a bit of a problem when there is that fixation on African Americans, because it makes it seem like, okay, for one thing, that they're in their society, they are at least Americans. So, going back again historically and thinking about my generation, such as they are, or around that time when I was growing up in Britain, you had to fight tooth and nail if you wanted to be considered British. So making that step into thinking about being European would be a huge step that certainly was unthinkable in the kind of 50s and 60s from what I recall. But, coming into the 70s, I remember the athletes, the Black British athletes who took the flag and wrapped it around them for the first time. And it was like, whoa, what's going on here? And, so there's this, I suppose what I'm saying is that our position, whether it's been in America, whether it's been in mainland Europe, or whether it's been in Britain, has always been contested as a place where we can feel comfortable and a sense of belonging and an identity which is both uniquely ours, that has a certain specificity of being Black African descent in the UK or wherever else in Europe, as I still like to think of us as being part of Europe, you know, there is the specificity of that experience at the same time as that diaspora-wide experience. So I don't know if that quite addresses what you were trying to say in your question.
No, it's fine. It's interesting. In that country, and they're all different in specific European countries. And so when you put Black people in that particular context, beside being Black, just having to deal with what it is to be Italian, what it is to be Dutch, what it is to be done, and it's all different from region to region, and how Black people can take up the form of being Black and European in each, and how it's the problematization of being Black and European within the old specific countries and nearly outdated modes of who could exist. I mean, the question is, how should we adapt? How should we adapt? Do we have to adapt? Samira, I don't know if you have any ideas on that, or the Dutch experience.
Sure, and let me be clear. My first response was completely independent from you, Lola. So just making sure that that nothing was misunderstood. I think it was very legitimate what you said. But still, my opinion is that things are not going quickly enough, especially in terms of education, because I do think it's pretty bad. What we have incorporated in the educational system on history. And take, for example, the USA. I do think that, you know, even though the very extreme situations that we have seen there in recent years, in a way, there is awareness, there is a public debate going on. And I think that in Europe, take, for example, my own country, the Netherlands, things are definitely not that significant in terms of the public debate that we have about racism and discrimination. It's mostly the recent times because of the Black Lives Matter movement that started in the USA and that pretty much flew over to the European continent. And we have very strong movements also in the Netherlands for years now, trying to trigger the debate and put the topics on the agenda. But I also said this year in a national TV show that if it maintains very uncomfortable to speak about, we will not have the progress that we wish for. So the educational system can really help in educating people to have good dialogues about it, but also to have dialogues about the pain that is still in even the last generations. Because what people really don't understand sometimes is that even though, take for example, my generation did not felt the pain or had the struggles my ancestors had, still we in a way are dealing with the pain that they had. And as long there's not recognition for the pain that our ancestors had, then, and a public recognition, then it will continue to be a very uncomfortable debate. And that's what I'm worried about, but also worried about in the Netherlands. So again, the educational system is very determining. And then I also believe that representation in this is a very crucial factor. So if you know, we recently had now last weekend the news about Kamala Harris becoming the first woman of color as vice president of the USA. Even though she's the vice president of the USA, it made me very emotional because it said to me through television that yes, this can also be the norm. Just like Barack Obama did, you can do it too. And what I'm worried about in the EU is and in Europe in general, is the lack of representation. So as long as we don't have politicians, political leaders that are of color, for example, and that can, you know, bring these kind of topics high on the agenda and that can make them a priority only by already being there and being visible, I believe that it's going to be very difficult to have change in the EU. What I do find very positive is that, for example, because of the push that some MEPs did, also from the Anti-Racism and Diversity Intergroup in the European Parliament, the European Commission really stepped up its game. in no time. So after George Floyd, we had the resolution in the European Parliament, and then they came out with an action plan against racism. I really see that as a positive outcome of the push that members of the European Parliament who are sensitive for the topic did, together with the Black Lives Matter movement outside our institutions. So that is an example of how representation matters. But it needs to be more. So two things that are crucial in the EU, if we really want to have structural change, that's representation and the educational system that's sensitive for history, the shared history we have.
Okay, thank you.
I totally, if I could say,
Yeah,
I absolutely, totally agree with you, Samira, because I mean, so many things you said. I think about pain and trauma. It's not just underestimated; it's wholly unrecognized, and that this kind of there's even, you know, there's research into that area now which demonstrates that pain and trauma, when it happens on that kind of scale, is passed down from generation to generation, and that we suffer from that. And I think that needs to be recognized. A lot of these things, as you said, will make a lot of white people feel very uncomfortable, and you know, that's something we've just got to get over that. Got to get over that and have that conversation. Representation, whether it's political or whether it's on the screen in movies or whatever, is incredibly important. And I think, you know, what you said is right about Kamala Harris. I saw some lovely photographs of the people that are in the same village that I think was it her mother was born in, and they were all celebrating her. And it's like, you know, I couldn't help but think that the women there were thinking, oh my gosh, one of us is now the vice president of the United States of America. And, you know, what else can we do here? And it has to be inspiring for people. And I'm very interested in what you said about the EU adopting an anti-racist position, because I would say, in our very British way, we come to diversity and inclusion. And I keep saying, but what about anti-racism? You know, anti-racism as a thing isn't necessarily encapsulated by this notion of diversity and inclusion, because you can smuggle all kinds of things under that heading without actually addressing the very fundamental thing of anti-racism. So that's just to kind of reiterate. And I just sort of wonder, I don't know, to be honest, I don't know anything really about what kind of model of colonialism the Dutch adopted. I know a little bit about the French model. It's very different to British. So I'm not surprised that things have played out differently in different parts of Europe for those former colonial powers, because they all had a different way of going about subjugating us.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's all.
No.
And one question, to Lola, because the plan of the European Commission is called anti-racism. So are you basically saying it does not cover it all, or is it the right connotation?
I'm agreeing, because you know, a number of organizations that I've been working with that sort of use this term diversity and inclusion, which is fine. And what that refers to briefly are all what we call the protected characteristics that you'll find in the Equalities Act. So, you know, it's people with disabilities, also it's people of different sexual orientation, faith, etc., etc. So there's all these protected social identities. And that's great, and absolutely on board with that. But when you use the term diversity and inclusion, to me, that doesn't make anti-racism explicit. And I think it's necessary to make it absolutely explicit. So I'm sort of saying, well done, the EU, for making that explicit.
Okay, good.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's one of the things about being Black European in this moment that struck me, about the whole idea of, as you know, the Black experience is not monolithic, and it's different for everyone. And also, there's not many dialogues in between different Black people in different European countries. You know, it's like in Holland, Surinamese may not be talking to other Black diaspora, and you might not have this kind of conversation. Has the Black Lives Matter started to create a cultural narrative that is more joined up in Europe? Do you think, or can it move from the energy of Black Lives Matter to a more joined up thinking in the narrative of a Black movement?
Yeah, I do think so. I mean, I do think that as long as Black lives are not guaranteed equally in society, I do think that we need to stick with the name Black Lives Matter, because it says something very crucial. It's stating that Black lives in our society are still more at risk, and that Black people in our society are still significantly being undermined in their fundamental rights. And that's just not something that we just say. I mean, research show it. We have the Fundamental Rights Agency also here in the EU that's reporting on it. They also did being Black in the EU. And it's very clear that that still Black lives are more at risk. So we need to stick with the name until we really see significantly change, and that we can really say Black lives are not more at risk anymore. So I do think that what the Black Lives Matter movement did is that they indeed broadened the scope, and they also made sure that many more people, even from other different backgrounds, are joining the movement and are joining the debate. And I think that's something very impressive what they did. I remember that when I was actually present at one of the demonstrations in Amsterdam after George Floyd, it was huge, unbelievable. And I looked around, of course, and I saw so many people from different backgrounds showing their support, and that are in the first place not the victims that are being defined within the Black Lives Matter movement. So it really says something about what this movement is doing. It's building coalitions, and it's very important that many more people from different backgrounds are joining the movement, because otherwise I don't believe we can have the significant change. It's also very important that that Black people in our society have the support and have a significant backup of other people in society on this topic. So I think they did broaden the scope and build bridges between different communities.
Yeah, across here, we have like movements like the Black Writers Guild. So there's a lot of things that come up from the energy of Black Lives Matter. And I think since Black Writers Guild, which is an association of all the best Black writers in the country, to be honest with you, and it's starting to assert some power. But I could easily see that if organizations like the Black Writers Guild didn't come out of Black Lives Matter, that a lot of the energy of Black Lives Matter in terms of the intercultural narrative conversation between diaspora could easily dissipate somewhat. What do you think, Lola?
Sorry, I was just thinking.
Yes.
Sorry, my eye was caught by something in chat actually, which of, I don't know if you wouldn't mind sort of, because I think it's quite an interesting question. It's from somebody called Jonathan Fryer. During the 2016 Brexit referendum, many Black Britons reportedly did not participate or else voted leave because they did not feel European or that Europe addressed their concerns. Have things improved since then? And I guess sort of part of the reason I sort of wanted to come to that was because of some of the things that Samira was saying just now about joining different communities together through Black Lives Matter. And, you know, it is an interesting thing. I'm trying to think back to the first time, because I had quite a lot of engagement with the EU when I was an academic, because we used to do the Erasmus scheme. And you know, I would go to these universities on mainland Europe and not see any Black colleagues in faculty at all, and a spattering of students. And so it wasn't much better here, to be honest. I'm not saying there were masses of Black people here either, but I guess I suppose what I'm saying is because of the differences in the different countries, it is quite difficult to see how you can insert yourself into this idea of Europe. So I think and also I would say some of the Black people to whom I spoke in the UK around the Brexit time had what I would sort of, how would I characterize it? That their attitude to foreigners, as they saw it, there was a pecking order, and that somehow because Black people had been here for X number of years, and then there were these people from Eastern Europe coming in and jumping ahead of them in the queue. That was how some Black people saw that situation, and therefore ended up voting Leave. So I think it's a very complex, there's no one single reason or one single rationale that you can give for the ways in which various Black people approach that whole Brexit referendum. But I would be very interested to see the results of any kind of research that was done into that. But I don't think it's a simple thing.
Yeah. You know, you mentioned before I'll ask one more question and then we'll start taking some questions. Everybody out there on Facebook and YouTube, if you want to send questions for Lola Young and Samira, by all means, send it in. I want to pick up on what you said about Kamala Harris and the whole idea that Americans, it's the idea I got from a writer called Johnny Pitts, who wrote a great book called Afropeans. And his idea was that Black Americans export their culture and export their stories. But people in Europe, Black people in Europe, don't export their stories. And there's an extension of that I think about a lot, is that by not exporting our stories, not just to America, but to everyone else, we have a sense of we can't, not that we want empathy from them, but we can't create empathy. And when we don't tell our stories, it's easy to not be seen as human or not to be seen as hate. You know, Johnny Pitt's book, Afropeans, is one of the first, well, besides the Carol Phillips book, one of the first books, one of the only other books I'd seen about Black European lives that I didn't know about. And I felt like I connected with these stories. And I felt like these stories are important in not being trampled, in not being abused, in not being dispossessed. Do you think that exporting our stories is an important part of it? Or it's not? They just be racist. People just be racist anyway.
No, again, you know, forgive me, I just always want to make things more complex or sure. Try and draw out some of the
problematize everything
of that. Yeah, because I would say, you know, there's a key factor that enables perhaps Americans, African Americans, as it were, to export their stories. I mean, I would even maybe contest that because it's only relatively recently that we've had, for example, movies that address significant Black American or Black diaspora storylines.
Right.
Now, if you're telling your story in certain kinds of music in a way that people want to hear or can sort of dance to and then maybe listen to lyrics or whatever, that's a different story. That's a different kind of story. But if you're talking about the language of movies or literature even, so whilst there have been big sort of international hits of authors like Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou, et cetera, there's still nothing like the kind of penetration that there are for those white American authors, or indeed for the kind of plaudits that they gain. So for us here, again, we're working from a low base insofar as our numbers and our access to the kinds of networks and platforms that enable us to get our stories out there for whoever. And, you know, there's a level on which it's really important to talk to ourselves, not exclusively, but to talk to ourselves. The other thing that can't be sort of overestimated would be language. And so for one thing, I guess we have an advantage of speaking and writing in English or a variant of English at this particular moment when English is the dominant language. You know, so there are opportunities for us, but it's really hard work in the creative and cultural industries, I think, for us to get those stories out there and to get them heard. I think some of that is about to change as a result of the murder of George Floyd, but we'll have to see further down the line what that is and how long it lasts.
Samir, are Dutch, do Dutch Black people's Black Europeans narrative come to the fore in terms of mainstream media?
Yeah, I think that especially some movements here in the Netherlands, take for example the Black Archives that we have here. I think there are examples of movements and organizations here in the Netherlands that are very well known now, also in the USA, in the UK. So they've done an amazing job by literally exchanging their views and expertises with other coalitions on the other side of the world. And what I know is that they also go to the USA, they also invite people from the USA, the UK, for example, to have these dialogues. And of course, social media is a very strong weapon in making yourself visible, of course. So again, I think that the Black Archives is a very good example of that. And what indeed, and I agree with Lola that's language, definitely. I think that's definitely has to do with it. But I also think it's a bit of, culture and mentality that we have in Europe, that we might not have been that explicit also about the topic. And there's still a reflection that, hey, if you're going to raise your voice and going to be very activistic, then the reflection sometimes regularly can be, just tone it down a little bit,
Right.
Or why do we speak about it again?
Right.
So we like responding very annoying.
Yes.
I even experienced that in the parliament as a politician when I want to raise the topics. So there's also something with mentality that needs to change. And I think that in the USA, it's much more accepted to be very vocal on it. And now you also have very strong political leaders, I believe, in the USA. Take, for example, the Squad, that is definitely not backing down. So that really helps for the public debate, and that sets an example of for everyone participating in society. And it creates more of a safe space when very visible leaders and influencers do so. So I think that this is something that also needs to change in Europe, and there's only one way to export our stories, and that is to be very vocal and to be very expressive. And the last thing I want to say about that is that I proposed also in the joint parliamentary exchange with the US that we recently had in the Committee on Human Rights. That was because of the situation that happened with George Floyd, the death of George Floyd. And after that, we had an exchange with some with senators and representatives of the US. And I said there that we really need to work on a joint EU-US action plan against racism and discrimination. And I think these kind of structures can really help also to export our stories.
Yeah, I think leading on from what you're saying about that type of attitude that you get as soon as you tell your story, like it's such a big problem, is part of the idea that Black Europeans, no matter how many decades they are born and bred in Europe, they could be born in Europe and be there for 50 years, but they still just came. They still don't belong here. They're still here at the behest that you're a guest. So you don't get to speak up like that. And so as a result, that type of thing is like, oh, you should be glad to be in this country. There's a great journalist across here called Afua Hirsch. You must know her. Afua Hirsch on television a couple of years ago was talking about the statues and what the statues represent. And then on national TV, one of the presenters told her, if you have so much problems with it, why don't you just leave? And she was like, leave? And go where? What are you talking about? You know what I'm saying? Is like the whole idea that you're a guest here, but she was born and bred here. Like that type of attitude. And how do you deal with the fallout of that? And how is it that you deal with, you made some very good points about, safe spaces being made by governments to have this conversation and to have some type of dialogue without being attacked, basically, because you have to create that safe space. But for individuals' own mental health, and I say individuals, I say me, me, my own mental health. How do you deal with, I need to communicate these stories, but I have to deal with all this fallout because it becomes tiresome, Lola, you have any ideas about that?
Yes, and well, a few. And again, it's when Samira was saying just now about representation, and I totally agreed with that. And then I thought all the times we've been burdened with representation.
Right.
This wonderful phrase that we have to carry the burden of representation. So, like if you, Samira, go in one day with your hair all awry and your suit not quite matching and your half your eye makeup on and half off, it's like, oh my God, those black women, but so you're not seen as an individual, and that is difficult. So what adds sort of storytelling and narrative creation is about saying, look, we have certain things in common, and one of those will actually probably be the experience of racism and discrimination. But we also have lots of differences between us that we're not afraid of, and we're not afraid to articulate. And here's our stories. And at the same time as we're writing those kind of individual or telling those individual stories and representing that sort of specific kind of identity, we would say there are universals that you can take from this. So, we're not allowed to have the burden of representation if we write a book about a Black person's experience, because then that's only about a niche story. So, this is why the whole thing is so complicated, because it's so contradictory. So, yes, if you can, and of course I know and have had sort of quite a few conversations with Afua about that experience. And I think you do have to look after your mental health. I think if you're getting dissed on Twitter to an unacceptable level, you come off. It's not going to, it's not, you do have to make sure that you can keep your sanity. And if that means closing off something for a while, then you close off. I don't think that's any kind of shame or to say that you've given up. You have to be able to write unfettered by all of that stuff coming into your head. And if you're constantly reading all of that stuff, then stop reading it. Those people, you're never going to convince those people anyway. Right. We've been talking quite a lot recently about, if you've got something that you want to do, you want to achieve something through Black Lives Matter or whatever it is, you're not going to convince everybody. So you have to kind of accept that there'll be a solid chunk of people who will hold those views, whatever you say or do. So it's not even worth bothering with those people. It's the people who haven't quite yet made up their mind, who are a bit more open to having dialogue and conversation, and with whom you can create safe spaces which say, look, let's have that dialogue and conversation, because this is what we want to do. This is what we think we're entitled to as much as anybody else. And I think, the thing about people being hounded, whether that's on Twitter or on television, it's par for the course, and you have to decide on what level it is you can take and what measures you need to take to stop that, because it will hamper you if you don't.
Yeah, I agree. Look, we have a question coming in for Samira from the interweb. This is from Judith Palmer. Samira, can I read this here for you, or can you see it?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, so take a look at it for a second, and I'll just read it out. Yeah. I wonder whether Samira thought the EU had lost positive anti-racist voices. Oops, just jumped. And advocates for diversity and inclusion along with Brexit. Back in about 2017, I was in a seminar with Bonnie Greer and Gina Miller And I remember a Black French woman speaking powerfully about feeling even more isolated within the EU, knowing she'd soon miss the diversity and perspective of some of her British colleagues. Her British colleagues did bring to EU institutions. Does that ring true for you?
Yeah, because actually the British delegation brought the most diversity, also in terms of staff members. And also they brought MEPs with a diverse background. And I remember that when I arrived in the European Parliament, actually one of the first MEPs I saw recognition. I was like, hey, you look a little bit the same like me. These were my British colleagues, you know, and that helps, and that's very supportive. And there was, you know, right away connection. Also because we also know how it feels to be, you know, one of the few within your own group, but let alone in the whole parliament. And I experienced that we together were very focal, even also independently from each other. So even if we didn't spoke with each other, you could just see that we were aligned in the things we said and the things that we put on the agenda. So of course, when they left, I felt like this is going to be a problem, because there will be a significant impact now on the you know, the influence and the power that we have. And I think that I truly believe that if we would still have the British delegation, for example, with the whole debate that we had about George Floyd and the USA and the resolution on racism, that they would have a very significant impact also on the outcome, and also on you know, sharing this publicly, that would have helped. So yes, I felt sad. I felt sad when they left. I really felt like I lost my coalition friends. Yes.
Thank you. We have another question for Alexis Wright. This might be a good question for you, Lola. They think it's an amazing discussion, so thanks for that. Do you have any idea how African Americans could serve as an ally to Black Europeans?
I think that we have, us in Britain, have probably got quite long-standing and relatively good relationships with African Americans, and that's partly because we have a number that are settled in the UK. I see that increasing, actually, having increased over the years, a number of, certainly in London, I should say. London is a separate country, and actually, you know, as far as London goes, we're still in the EU, so, you know, we can still communicate with our friends and diaspora colleagues in mainland Europe. But yeah, so I think that, I mean, I can't think of anything specific, although I do know that MPs in the House of Commons, for example, do have regular kind of catch-ups with Black Caucus in Washington. So there are those kind of like more or less formal connections. But I think culturally there's still points of contention, and it goes back to something we were saying earlier. We're not one homogeneous group. Yes. So I think we will keep up a useful, productive dialogue, and long may that last. And also, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
And also the histories are quite different. You know, we don't have that kind of civil rights marches and sorry.
Yeah, no. Sorry, you're absolutely right. That's what I was going to go on and say.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
Yeah, no. I thought I'd better shut up, but but yeah, I think our histories are very interesting, and I do feel that there are assumptions that lead to kind of misunderstandings on both sides. So I know that sometimes African Americans are say things like, "Oh, you're so British." Say, well, yeah. you know, in a way, in a way we are. And I sort of think,
Yeah.
oh my God, they're so American, you know,
Yeah.
because they are.
Yeah.
So we, you know, we do have a lot of cultural differences in that big sense. Yeah, plenty of common ground. Plenty of common.
Yeah.
And similarly with our European, I think the thing is with our, you know, because we're so flipping hopeless at languages in Britain, seriously, that is a big barrier to having sustained dialogue with our friends and colleagues, diaspora colleagues on mainland Europe. But I for one, and I know there'd be others who'd be really happy to have a continued dialogue, because some of us still see ourselves as being part of Europe.
Right. So, okay, so there's another question by Alexis Wright. I believe it's a woman, Alexis. I definitely agree that education and discussions are important to learn from others' experiences, but what can we actively do about it? Actively do about the education situation and discussions, you know? Either of you. Lola's like,
No, it's a very difficult question, but it's a good question because, you know, I mean, we cannot endlessly wait till the educational system is showing any progress, but it should be, we should continue to work on the educational system. Also, that means that also we speak a lot about representation in politics, but what about representation in education?
Right.
Because we also need, you know, the right role models and more people from different backgrounds that are just teaching people, teaching our youth. Exactly. So that can also hopefully speed up the process more. So I think also from the educational sector, there needs to be also a campaign and very, very good recruitment and selection processes through which people with more different backgrounds can be a teacher.
Sure.
Sorry?
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. And then the second thing, what we can all do, of course, is, you know, look, I remember that I was in a leadership program for young leaders from Europe and the USA. It's called the Transatlantic Inclusion Leaders Network. And actually, one of my teachers has been Simon Woolley, and being part of the House of Lords, and is also has done a terrific job on Operation Black Vote in the UK, and we teached there. There was actually one mentor who taught us, you know, if they don't invite you to their party, you just organize your own party. And I think it's also for this, that if we think it's not going too quickly enough, then we should make sure that we keep organizing the dialogues and the activities, and use also social media and the tool to spread the thoughts around. And I think that's very important to do, because we cannot wait for policymakers and politicians to put that topic on the agenda. So we also need to teach people ourselves, and we have very strong instruments nowadays to do that. Organize dialogues, organize live webinars, and on the micro level, you can already do it within your group of friends, acquaintances, family members. Be very proactive in the debate also on the micro level. That really helps, because if it's only like one person a day that you can convince of something different, that can help, because if everyone does that, then we can do that together. But organize your own party.
My millennial friends, writers, artists, they are so incredibly vocal online. And sometimes I actually fear for them. Like, I'm 53 years old, and they're like 21, and I'm like, oh my God, can you say that? You know, but I quite love the energy of the young Black millennial organizations who just like, we are not having it. We are not your generation, and we are not waiting for anybody to do anything. We're not asking, we're not begging, we're just not having it. And I think that's a real interesting energy. It's not what I'm accustomed to, I'll be honest with you, but I'm learning from it, you know. And some progress has been made through it, I guess, but also they have that kind of collective notion. Like one producer, a theater producer called Toby Kiramatting, raised her own money so Black people can go to see theater, you know, called the Black Ticket Project. And I think that these little collective things, like you say, I'm trying to pick up on your point, is that if they're not inviting you to their house, make your own house. I think it's a very interesting mindset, you know. Although they've always had generations of people, like everyone from Linton Kwesi Johnson, the poet, who just like, I'm not having it. They've always had been, you know.
I was just going to say, don't.
Yeah. I'm not trying to. I'm not trying to write up
sorry to interrupt you, Roger. I have to interrupt you because I feel this generational thing quite keenly. And I think, you know, it's wrong to characterize it as an intergenerational thing. As you just said, Linton Kwesi Johnson. And also, let's be clear about this. The party that they're having is using our money, right? Yes. So I have every right to demand that they, you know, that we're invited to that party because we paid for the food as well. Yes. And we're probably serving it to people as well. Yes. So it's like, but I think it's a twin track thing. It's not one thing or the other, and that you have to make a choice at the same time as saying okay, I'm going to set up a Black history course for 6 and 7 and 8 year olds. Yes. You say that at the same time as going to the school and saying, do you know what? There are people other than Rosa Parks and Frederick Douglass and the rest that we can talk about here that have a specifically British/European perspective, and here they are. Yes. And you know, so you don't have to choose between the two. And I, you know, when I think of all the people that I know of my generation and older, who literally gave their life to fighting these struggles. No, I didn't want to diss the other generations. It wasn't a comment on the sorry. No, and of course, the fervor of the young generation is based upon the shoulders of those who came before. You know what I'm saying? So there's a space being made. Of course. And also what we've got is this fantastic opportunity with the social media and the interweb, as you ironically call it, and so on and so forth. So yes, let's be having that thing whereby we of the older generation can do that succession stuff, which is nurturing, encouraging, and bringing up the ladder, you know, not taking up the ladder, but bringing people up that ladder as well. At the same time as saying, go ahead and do your thing and enjoy using that energy and that dynamism, but don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Because my final point on this is because I'm actually getting a bit tired, not in this conversation, but when I hear young Black people say, this is the first time anybody's ever done X, Y, and Z. No, it isn't. We've got to be clear about our history as much as anybody else. Of course.
Yeah, but I think that, you know, you should, what I always tell other people, I mean, I get a lot of questions from mostly young people who are interested in politics or who don't like politics, and then they're saying that, you know, what should I do? Should I, for example, I'm invited to a round table, and then again, I need to share, and I will not teach them anymore. And I completely understand the emotion. But what I always say is that, look, if you have the opportunity to sit at that table, you just go there. Because you go there, but it's not necessary to talk along with them. I mean, the moment you're there, you can just share your own opinion. Yes. And you can be yourself. And at the same time, what I'm just saying is that, you know, I don't think we should be that dependent anymore of other politicians or people or policymakers, and, you know, waiting until they are doing the things that also work, for example, for Black people in society, because we have the leverage to also organize our own thing. And that's basically what I'm also doing. I'm also part of the system. I think it's I'm very aware of being part of the system, but I also want to change things within that system. And at the same time, I'm also organizing my things outside the institutions,
Yes.
the dialogues and the activities, etc. So you can do it on both paths. And the only thing I'm saying is that just know that you have your independency and you can be autonomous if you really think it's important, and you can do your own thing. But do it in connection.
Yes.
I would say do it in a way that still that one feet is in the system and the structures that you want to change.
Okay. On that note, Samira and Lola, it's been such a pleasure talking to you two. I guess we could talk for a whole other hour, but we have to come to a close. And I think, ending on that point is interesting because the reality about being Black in Europe is that it's very nuanced. It's not black or white. There are loads of problems, there are loads of benefits, and things are specific to different regions, and so it's complex, and not necessarily problematized, but it is complex. It's not something that you can call easily, and hopefully we go on and have dialogue. I want to thank you, Samira. I want to thank you, Lola, for having time to chat with me. I want to thank everybody who's out there who sent in questions. I want to thank everybody who helped organize it. So we're going to come to an end. If anybody wants to kind of carry it on, you could carry it on social media. Thanks, everybody, and we're going to be out.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Stay in
Thank
touch.
you.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.